want to welcome again Dr. Tanya McCartney. She is calling in from the Bahamas. And Tanya, please give us a little bit of a background, a little bit about yourself, how you got into compliance, and you're teaching at the law school there as well. So just give us a little bit of background.
Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this session. I would like to think I'm probably one of the grandmothers of compliance here in the Bahamas. I'm an attorney by profession, having worked in the public sector in our Office of the Attorney General, dealing with civil litigation as well as international matters where we had requests from various countries under mutual legal assistance agreements. I would go to the financial institutions and ask them for the information, make sure it wasn't a fishing expedition to help our international partners. And so that was my first taste of anything to do with international financial services. But in 2000, the Bahamas, 1999, 2000, the Bahamas found itself on various lists to do with our AML regime. And we passed legislation, a compendium of legislation, which really was the core of what we have now in place in terms of our AML regulations. And one of the things required was that financial institutions have a compliance officer in place. So I was recruited from the public sector and went into the private sector in 1999 as legal counsel and compliance officer. And that began my journey in a private trust company. Since then, I've worked in trust and fiduciary services. I've worked in retail banking as well. I've even done compliance in the gaming sector. So I've touched the full breadth, I want to say, almost of this area of compliance. And I was a founding member of our Bahamas Association of Compliance Officers, and I am a former president. And so I keep my feet in it, but now I've pivoted to consulting and I teach. I even helped to develop a course in AML compliance for business students at the University of the Bahamas. So it's a course that they have to take if you're a business major at the university, because financial services is so important to us. So I teach, I consult, and I actually love this area. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. And so welcome again. I really appreciate it. And again, we've had some back and forth in preparation for today's call. And I think we were both saying, you just made me think about this. I just made you think about this. Because again, with your background and the breadth of the industries that you've touched, you're going to come and be able to provide some I think, very valuable information and suggestions for people to think about. And as I explained, there's no right or wrong. Everybody's a little bit different. We have people from all over the world, well over 100 different countries from different industries, even some regulators, listen in as well. So we're all still kind of learning. So there's no right or wrong answer. Again, just kind of reassuring those, but we just want to make sure we're being very comprehensive in our risk assessments. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn off my camera, and I'm just going to move on to the next slide and do some quick housekeeping, because these are just to remind people, Dr. McCartney is an attorney, but this is not to be taken as legal advice. We do keep these at about 1 hour. I apologize if we do go over a little bit for those who can. There is a certificate of attendance for those who are listening in live. We do record this, of course, and but you will get a certificate of attendance to the email that you registered with about 1 or 2 hours at the end, after the end of the broadcast. This says questions at the end, but do feel free to use the question box at any time between Tom and I. We will monitor those and try and answer your questions, whether it's relating to the discussion or also use the question box if we do ask you to kind of comment on something and provide some input. So feel free to use that. Recording and slides will be made available as well. We do have the recording on our website, and I think you can download the slides as well from there. And of course, do bear in mind the upcoming AML Gray Matters topics. If you do have to jump off a little bit early, we've got these topics coming up on AML responsibilities internal audits and the expanding scope of sanctions. And I wanted to remind people too, we often speak the same language but have different dictionaries. And so being very, having clarity in what what a term means, especially if you're new or if you're not in the AML profession directly 100% of the time. If we use a acronym that you are not familiar with, please do put in the little question box. What does that mean? I do try very hard to make sure we're being clear, very aware that you might use a term differently than I use a term, and that is a very common issue in this industry and other industries as well. And with that, we're going to kick off. This is the general agenda. We might stray from it based on this discussion, but as I'm sure you're all aware, we have the risk-based approach, and that's what kind of confuses people whenever yet you have to have standardized systems in place. And so when you've got standardized systems and checklists, that kind of conflicts with the quote-unquote risk-based approach. That is a very kind of common problem with this industry. What I thought was interesting is that Dr. McCartney, you brought up about the organization's business model, and I thought that was a fantastic approach to the start of your business risk assessment, because you raised some very important issues that a firm's size, structure, workflow impacts how you're going to do a risk assessment. So that's fantastic. And then I kind of segmented, the services you provide, and and those delivery channels, how you deliver your products and services, as well as part of the risk assessment process. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with the next slide, and then I'm going to pass it off to Dr. McCartney. I work with a lot of different companies, large and small, different industries, all AML regulated. And this is what I see as the typical risk assessment checklist. Raise your hand if you think this is your typical. I mean, I've kind of covered the basics of what you would have in your risk assessment, whether it's a checklist, a form. Yes, I've got a couple of thumbs up, raising hands. Yep, so yeah, lots of thumbs up here. Basically, we're capturing their names, what product or service they're requesting from us, how you're going to onboard them, which might be also seen as the delivery channel, whether or not they were referred by. I actually see a little bit less of that, but I see more of it these days. Things like nationality, country of residence, if it's a corporate entity, where it was registered, where its principal place of operations. And then most people are like, are any of those countries high risk? Yes or no? Then their industries or economic activity or business sector. Again, that's that terminology use that might be a little bit different. And then again, people are often kind of asked to confirm, are any of those industries high risk? Or they might use the terminology, is it a prohibited business or prohibited activity? And then, of course, what I call client types or characteristics or segmentation. Are any PEPs or close associates or a family member? If it's a corporate industry, you might ask if are they regulated or listed? And then there's all those other what you call red flags or characteristics. We call them notable risks in silo. Is there any complex ownership, use of nominees? Was there any adverse media found in screening? Are there any honest sanctions? And that's kind of like the basic typical risk assessment, whether you call it a checklist, a form, or matrix. That's pretty much what I see. And Tanya, would you agree with this? This is pretty much what you see as well, and fairly comprehensive.
Absolutely.
Covers all the basics. Good.
Absolutely.
All right. And with that, I'll let you kind of talk about that risk-based approach.
Okay. Good morning again, everyone. It's a pleasure to facilitate this. Now, this particular slide here, our first slide, is going to anchor us in the FATF's risk-based approach. And what the risk-based approach expects of us is that we tailor our AML CFT counterproliferation efforts to identify the particular type of risk, to assess it, as opposed to applying a one-size-fits-all approach. So you need to map every factor that influences your institution's risk profile. This means cataloging all of your products, services, delivery channels, clients, geographical exposures, and then move into a deep dive on whether the occurrence of the risk is likely or not, assessing what the impact of the realization of that risk would be on your institution, and then assign a rating to it. So we shouldn't adopt a risk-based, a one-size-fits-all approach. So that's the baseline. That's where we're starting today. Okay, your goal is to make sure that your risk scores are accurate, that your controls in place are more targeted, and you document the reasons for the risk level assessment so that it is defensible. And so we've heard about the typical risk assessment checklist, but the FATF recommendation 1 expects you to know your inherent risk, test your controls, and then own the residual risk. So I wanted to anchor our discussion in that approach. No one size fits all. And now we talk about business models and risk amplifiers. So risk lives where decisions live. So who collects data, who validates it, who approves it, who reviews it, who trains, all of that can impact your risk level. And the business model is really the strategic framework that you have in place to determine how you deliver value through your products and services to your customers. Your business model will then impact the various service delivery channels. It will determine which target markets you focus on, which products you put to the market, and how you execute on that behind the scenes in terms of transactions and the like. So the business model is the brain, the central nervous system of your organization. And as such, it will determine how everything else flows. Okay, so business, and with that comes risk. And so you need to determine, based on your model, based on the products that are offering, who is responsible, who approves certain relationships, set schedules to check by risk tier, and the like. So business model first, and that determines how you operationalize the provision of your services. And it can bring risk according to the nature of your model. Okay, and why does it matter? It matters because it shapes your risk management strategy. Okay, if you are if it's a centralized model, you get consistency, cleaner exceptions. There's an opportunity for you to watch to see where there's a particular risk concentration, compared to a decentralized model where perhaps it may be branches or units, not one central hub. A decentralized unit may be fast, but the standards may vary from unit to unit. And so there's a risk there in terms of making sure that across the board that the standards, the controls that you put in place apply. And then if you have a boutique firm versus a high volume firm, that may also impact how your risk is, how your business model impacts your risk, whether it increases it or mitigates it. In a boutique firm, for those of you who may be in, say, a trust company or maybe professional services, deep relationships help you to see some signals, but with familiarity, bias may creep in, which may cause you to relax and not identify certain risks. So business model business model matters. Okay, next slide. Service and products. Okay, service and products. The point here on service and products is that you need to clearly understand the products and services that you are providing. In helping clients to complete AML risk assessments, when we look at the products and services, you cannot take a global approach. You have to look at each service and assess the risk associated with it. Wires present a different risk level compared to an over-the-counter transaction in a retail banking sector or a banking sector. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You need to get granular. You need to look at the actual product, look at mitigating controls that you have in place, and assess the effectiveness of those controls and determine what the residual risk is in relation to the particular service or product. Okay, so a bank, outbound wires to higher risk countries. These may present a higher risk. For your trust and corporate service provider, you may be offering company formation for non-residents with nominee roles. That again presents a different type of risk. And you will be assessing whether your due diligence processes, your monitoring processes sufficiently mitigates that risk. For the real estate agents who are closing with corporate buyers, you need to look at whether you're comfortable, if you have controls in place to sufficiently identify who your ultimate beneficial owner is in relation to the transaction. So with each product or service, there is a unique risk associated with it, and you cannot take a global approach. You must look at the particular service or product. Next.
Yeah, and I'll have some questions for you at the end about corporate services risk assessment. Yeah.
So we know that business model, products, and delivery channels they intersect, okay? Because there is an intersection between product risk and channel risk. And it's not enough to look at the product or the channel in isolation. You need to think and almost come up with a combined risk score. For example, a basic savings account opened in a branch under close supervision might score as low risk. But shift that same onboarding to a fully remote digital channel without enhanced ID checks, then the result of the risk level could jump from low to medium or high. So it's important for you as practitioners in this space to implement a dynamic risk scoring engine that continuously sort of recalibrates as client behavior and channel usage evolves. While a client initially may be someone who comes in, but they may shift to digital, then you need to take note of that so that you can apply controls where they're most needed in real time. And so we have a couple polling questions here, and I'm going to ask Kimberly to please run, if we can do the polling questions.
Yep.
Question one is, what is the most common delivery channel at your organization? And you could put it in the chat.
Yeah, you could. So Tom, if you could launch that first polling question, what's the most common delivery channel at your organization? Again, most of us are working at what we'd call international financial centers. I think I maybe met in person about a dozen or less of our clients. And everything else was done by email back in my day. We didn't even have video calls, so you're lucky. So yeah, so many of us, I think, don't meet our clients or our customers in person.
Right.
And then yet if you look at the guidance, most guidance say, well, if you don't meet them face to face, they're higher risk, whether it's just a medium risk or what. So that automatically makes most of us having quote unquote higher risk clients. So this is the reason why when we get, you'll see some slides at the end where I kind of talk about a little bit of, we're kind of in how they all intersect. And it could be that most of your clients are doing everything via email. A lot of times I'm working with people and they never even interact with the quote unquote controlling parties or UBOs. They're dealing with third parties. They're dealing with their lawyers, their investment advisors. So it is so oftentimes a third party engagement that adds a little bit more risk that might not even be considered in your risk assessment. You might just go, oh, we're doing everything by email. Who are you is giving you the instructions in that email? Is it an intermediary? Is it a lawyer, for instance?
I want to add, what we see here, you're absolutely correct that there is heightened risk where it's non-face-to-face. What these results emphasize is that channel matters just as much as the product. And non-face-to-face onboarding and third-party intermediaries are classic risk lifters. They increase the risk level. And so there are things that you want to watch out for. For the non-face-to-face, which is the majority here, you want to ensure that there are EKYC steps. In this day of AI, video alone isn't truly in person without liveness. I use that word liveness, and documenting authenticity checks. So there needs to be controls in place. If you're using agents and intermediaries, I see 16% here. You need to do due diligence on the intermediaries. Build in audit rights and termination triggers. If you're not getting all of the due diligence, if you're relying on them to do some of the due diligence for you. So channel matters, and there are things that you watch out for, and you have to elevate the level of due diligence that you do based on the channel that you are choosing.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And so just for those, I don't know, Tom, if you shared, and just so you know, Tom, I'm getting a sharing is paused notice on my screen. I've never seen that before. Can you still see my screen? Or that might be part of the poll?
It is showing as live.
Okay, that's fine. So yeah. So the poll is 18% of you have said that your delivery channel that is most common at your organization is in person or face-to-face. 64% are saying it's online, whether that's mobile apps, emails. I did put video calls in there on the online. And then third parties, agents or intermediaries at 16%. And 2% of you have said other. I'm quite curious as to what that other is. So if you don't mind, let me know what the other is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can close that poll, Tom.
And in the context of risk assessments, it's good to know what your channels are, but you also need to have your compensating or mitigating controls in place. And that's going to be using biometrics, perhaps. It might be behavior rules to make sure that you're continuously monitoring those relationships, set up verification, make sure that there's enhanced due diligence, for example, when onboarding. And for those of you who are not in the traditional banking and financial services space, DNFBPs, if you onboard, it may be a real estate transaction and you're onboarding via email, it may be an international client buying a piece of property in the Bahamas or somewhere, then you want to require certified documents, you want to get callbacks to known numbers. These are things that regulators will look at when you talk about your control environment and how you are moderating the risk associated with a particular channel. Because ultimately, you're going to have to come up with an overall risk for your institution. And for each of these risk factors, delivery channels, you're going to have to assess what that risk level is within your organization. And your controls help to moderate that.
Yeah. Okay, Tom, if we can issue the poll question number 2, and again, this is just a general question. I'd like to kind of find out what's going on out there. So the question is a video call with a client or customer considered in person or face-to-face at your organization? I'm seeing more people saying yes to that. I mean, not just in this poll, but just kind of from discussions and talking to people. And I'm just kind of curious as to what others are thinking around the world. And again, it's not just I had a call with them, I saw them on the video, so they're face to face. I don't need their ID. Of course, you still need their kind of ID, and again, that can be mitigated, controlled more as well with the, passport, whether it's certified copy or electronic ID verification as well. But yeah, so just so you know, so 28% of you right now are saying yes, 21% are saying sometimes, 45% are saying no.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, and 6% are saying don't know.
So Kimberly, the
Yeah.
majority here is saying perhaps yes and sometimes. And it's interesting, and I'll share a personal story. And my answer, I'm going to say what my answer is on this. And so there are no right or wrong answers. There are views, and I'll tell you what shaped my view. I'll say no. Okay. I'll say no. And you know why? I have had an incident involving some property that I own, and there may be real estate agents on this. And an individual purporting to be the owner of that property arranged a sale for it. It actually happened in the US. It was on the news in the US. So a piece of property that we own in the United States, and an individual was purporting to sell it. The attorney for the buyer reached out to me. I wasn't selling the property, but she did a check on various government records and found that certain bills were being paid by me in relation to the property. She said, we had a video call with the proposed vendor. There was a video call. But as they began to probe and ask some interesting questions, so they were doing their due diligence, they realized that the person, their arms were not moving. The answers were, I want to say, they were robotic, because they were talking to an AI generated person, and the matter had to be reported. It looked very real, but this individual, had she just gone on the video, yes, and accepted it as it was without doing some additional due diligence, this attorney, we would not have known that somebody was trying to sell this property. Turns out it was AI. It was an AI generated individual. So you have to do additional checks.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that AI is causing a lot more risk there with these videos. I think it's just kind of like one aspect of as we're talking about. And I don't know, we're already at half past the hour. We've still got a few slides to go. Should we just kind of keep going a little bit?
Let's keep going. Going, because this is an interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. So this is what I see a lot with industry, economic sectors being assigned. You'll say, oh yeah, this person's in the construction industry, education, healthcare. Do you see this similarly as well?
Oh, absolutely. Certain sectors can be and are exploited by criminals. We know typically cash intensive businesses, and so yes, there can be exploitation depending on the industry or the sector. And so it's important to properly classify your customers. And I think we're going to talk about that. You need to be able to identify precisely what sector they are working in. They may say financial services, but what exactly are they doing in financial services? When we were talking, we talked about healthcare. They may say that they are in healthcare, but not all healthcare workers or people in that sector, your clients, are to be treated the same. Perhaps an executive in the healthcare sector or a shareholder in a hospital or a clinic would be treated differently from the nurse or or someone else working in the sector. And so you have to get granular when you're assessing industry or sector risk and not take a one size fits all approach. Again, you're taking a risk-based approach. And there are tools that can help you to map the risk within various sectors. All right. Of course, your regulator may have guidelines on certain sectors that are higher risk than others. There may be industry association benchmarks, but then there are tools like your International Standard Industrial Classification, ISIC codes, where you can get really granular and find out exactly what's the nature of the risk associated with your particular customer. Okay.
Right. And just so you know, I have been through that ISIC list because I'm starting to use it more often as a standard list because I felt these are too wide to be risk rated or risk scored in any way. So as I get more granular, but even then I'm finding it is still difficult. So it's not an easy process to go.
No.
A pharmaceutical company is higher risk than a hospital, for instance. Mining, for instance, to throw all mining industry activities as high risk, because as we all know, mining is deemed high risk. But a small gravel operator which we have here where I live, they dig up gravel from the earth, and that's deemed as mining. That's very different versus a gold mining operation in I guess Africa, one of the countries in Africa. So again, you have to be kind of very aware of exactly what is the activity doing, what's their role in that activity, if you're talking about a nurse versus a CEO, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was just, I do see too many people just kind of putting people into their clients into these big definitions, and I think we need more granular assessments.
What I found
country risk. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what I found as well, the tools. So we talk about the ISIC codes. The UN publishes a list where they, depending on the area, so depending on the risk or like if there is conflict, they will tell you the sectors that may be impacted in there. So where there's conflict and there may be bribery and corruption risk associated with it. There's a list published. I'll share the link so that you can give it to all of the attendees. They'll tell you, pay attention to the mining sector, pay attention to defense activity. For modern day slavery, they may say to you activities of domestic personnel, construction may be vulnerable to it. Manufacturing of certain electronics may be vulnerable to it. So people working in factories and the like. So it will tell you the sector and what type financial crime it might be vulnerable to. And I think that's a useful list as well to have that will help you to sometimes think a little bit more about the industry risk and the type of financial crime that may be associated with a particular sector.
Great, and you'll share that list with me
so
we can send it to everybody.
I will.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll make sure we share that. Country risk, as we all know, is part of the risk assessment, whether it's their nationality, place of birth, where operations are happening. I don't want to go into this. We've actually had a separate webinar just going over how to risk rate countries.
Yeah.
And again, it is an art form, and it is constantly changing because there's more information out there. So if you're struggling with country risk assessments, you're not alone. I still struggle. I won't even talk much about this, but if you're learning this situation, there's just some options for you to kind of look into, and there is no flat out list. It depends on where you're operating, where your clients are operating. It's just, there's so many nuances there. We could talk all day about that. Now, this was a risk assessment scenario that I put together. And in this scenario, whatever service provider, whether you're a bank and she's coming to you to open up a bank account, or a lawyer and she's coming to you for legal advice, or corporate services, company, or even the real estate agent. So she comes in, or she mails you, and she's requesting your service because she wants to purchase a beach condo in your country. We see this a lot, especially in corporate services, that they're starting companies and then they're saying, oh, it's going to be a holding company for a condo. And let's just assume the service, you've deemed your service as low risk. You get her passport, she submits a form, and you find out, okay, she's going to set up a local company to purchase for tax liability purposes, and she's going to live it half the year and rent it out. She's going to be sole shareholder and director. She puts down as her occupation a nurse. She's retired. Her source of wealth and funds for this particular purchase is going to be her savings or investments. I'm going to skip industry here. Her nationality, place of birth, Canada, we'll say low risk. She's not a PEP. She doesn't show up on any PEP lists or any screening results, or clean, no adverse media. She's not sanctioned. And let's say the transaction amount is less than 500,000. My question, I got two questions. What industry sector would you be using for her risk assessment? Is it that she's in healthcare, even though she's a retired nurse, or would it, and I'm not going to, I'll say let's go ahead and release the poll questions. Yeah. Or are you going to put real estate because she's buying property? These are the kind of nuanced questions, and this is something that you need to address in your training. Because you could have, if you have a larger team, you could have one person saying, oh, her industry sector is healthcare, and maybe even get kind of more granular about that, like she's on the services side. Or it could be somebody else on your team says she's, this particular client matter is connected to the real estate sector because she's there to buy property. So that kind of, what's the word? It's just a little bit of difference for same company, two different staff members could be putting that in separately. Tom, would you release that poll? Let's see how everybody would put that. Because what happens ultimately is that's going to impact your reports even to senior management. If you had to do a report to senior management and they wanted to find out how many of their clients are involved in the real estate industry, would she pop up as a client in the real estate industry if you had put healthcare? So right now we're showing 4% have said none. They would say there's no industry related because she's retired. 12% of you are saying she's this particular client is in the healthcare industry. 47% are saying it's in the real estate industry because she's coming to you to buy the real estate. And 30% of you are saying both. Tanya, what's your thought on that? Actually, we're now getting 11% saying none. Yeah. But that tells you how different we all approach what is supposed to be a very simple question to the risk assessment.
So I'm going to pick a side, and my view on this is that it is, what industry or sector would you use for her risk assessment? Really difficult, but let's go with real estate. I'll look at the transaction, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, and it could be that it really should be two different questions. Her source of wealth funds is healthcare because that's where it came from, but the transaction industry is real estate. So again, look at your risk assessments and any reporting requirements and consider it that way. You might need to make just a small little change there. So let's close that poll and move on to the next one. And the next question was, okay, so she emails you, no face-to-face yet. What's her delivery channel? What's the delivery channel risk for Miss Sue? So I just asked, is it high, medium, or low? And what would you say if that email, let's say you don't get to meet her before you start providing her with services or signing her up as a client? Okay, yes. So right off the bat, people are saying high risk, 50 to 60% are saying she's higher risk because it's just email. Only a few are saying it's low risk. So even with a certified copy of passport, I mean, maybe that's how you mitigate the fact that you've just communicated with her by email. But yeah, okay, we can move on because again, I don't want to run too far over. But thank you for participating in that and giving us some of that feedback to show how that is very much can be done differently and risk assessed. So if we could close that poll, Tom, and I think I'm gonna skip over this one, but when you do get the slides, think about this. So that was risk mitigation. We were going to talk about risk mitigation. It's the risk assessment scenario 2. What this was going to do is Mary calls and requests a meeting at your office, so a very similar situation, and that she was going to look at properties. Value was going to be a bit more higher. Again, very similar situations. Canada, not a PEP, no screening. But again, she doesn't actually, she just puts in she's retired and things like that. I would say, and we'll skip over this just to save some time, but this is an example of how you could look at a very similar scenario, but one is higher risk. And the reason why I put this scenario in this, because this is a real situation I experienced. And I'll go ahead and tell you the end of the story was that this person had actually embezzled money and was trying to get the money out of the States to hide it. And so they weren't kind of forthcoming. Everything was low risk. Nothing happened there, even with the adverse media, because they had not been found out yet. The reason why I was able to, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there are 2 triggers I see that would cause me to assess this at an elevated risk, because while it's similar to the last transaction that we looked at, we see that the transaction description is for tax liability purposes, and we also see the transaction amount. So in this particular case, just on the amount and the purpose, I would want to make sure that you my mitigation would involve collecting robust source of wealth information with evidence on assets, investments. So those would be the types of things I'd need to know where that money came from, not just where it came from in terms of source of funds. How did she accumulate the corpus of her wealth to be purchasing a property at that price? So enhanced due diligence right away, tax and the amount.
Absolutely. And how I was able to, well, again, that was just where my spidey senses went up on that one. And the other thing was, so what I asked for and never got was I said, I need to find out, I need to get a letter from your tax lawyer or accountant, who is advising you that you need to go set up a foreign company, in her words, an offshore company. Why are you being told you need to do that? Why can't you set up a U.S. company? I wasn't trying to turn away the business, but it was just one of those situations. And of course, oh yeah, no problem. I'll get that to you right away. And it didn't. And of course, I ended up putting the name on a kind of a Google alerts. And sure enough, it was about 6 months later, it popped up that arrest had been made. For the embezzlement. So yeah, that was just trust your instinct and don't be afraid to ask for confirmation of who's giving the advice.
Yeah.
So I put together this little circle. So this is where Tanya and I were talking. And I was going to say, at the end of the day, it all kind of intersects. Go back to mining industry. The mining industry where I live, and I live in Arkansas, in the state of Arkansas, it is regulated by the Arkansas government the Arkansas Department of, I think, Agriculture or something, highly regulated. And of course, they mine everything from gravel and sand to now soon lithium, which is needed for the electronic batteries. So that's kind of a big thing there going on in our industry. The delivery channel, for instance, also, like, would you consider a referral from a very highly regulated bank or something, or a very well-known and respected lawyer or something like that? Would that help you reduce the delivery channel risk? Going back to the industry, like, the mining in one country is going to be different risk rated than mining in another country. So this is where that country risk comes into place. And see, one of the other questions, like, what is face-to-face meeting sufficient for delivery channel, or do you consider the most common? If is one face-to-face meeting sufficient to be deemed as the delivery channel face-to-face, or is it just that you met them once, but then everything else is email? What would be your answer to that, Tanya?
I think this one.
Or would it depend on the type of business you're in? Like a real estate agent?
I think it would depend on the type business that you are in. We're looking at these questions here. You know, a real estate agent may be different from a trust company that has eligible introducers, which is totally different. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah, and this is why, again, sometimes you can't figure it out. You need to kind of discuss with people like yourself, Tanya, and others how they're doing, because you're not going to be able to find it in guidance notes and regulations themselves. This is those gray areas of compliance that challenge us often. Yeah. And then I had this, you actually had quite a few of these, what we call the other risk factors, such as what I would call, some people would call it client type, some people would call it client characterizations, or client sectors themselves. And that is things like, their PEP status, obviously, which we won't discuss PEPs. Was there any adverse media? And a yes or no with adverse media in my book is not yes, it's the type of adverse media. Was it really significant? Is it related to a financial crime? Were they accused? Were they convicted? Even that has segments of itself.
Yep, you have. I mean, you have to search multiple languages. You need to use name variants. You have to consider the how recent was this adverse news? Is the source credible? So it may be adverse news, but you need to assess it and determine the weight that you would give to that particular piece of information in determining the risk profile of the client.
Right. Another area that I find is people will look into sister or subsidiary operations. This is of a corporate client.
Yeah.
So they'll look at, does this corporate client have any subsidiaries or sisters in its organizational structure that are high risk? Well, if you're forced to do that on a checklist, the question is, when should you be doing that? I mean, there are times I'm sure that it is relevant, but when is it relevant? When do you ask that question? And if that subsidiary or sister, does that make your client automatically high risk? So again, things to consider. I don't have the answers for you.
It's very complex. It requires analysis, because if you have a relationship where there's group risk and you have a parent and a subsidiary at the outset of the relationship when onboarding, and you know about this relationship, then it may be at that stage. However, something may change. You may see different types of transactions taking place. You may see payments going to or coming from another entity, and when you probe, you find out that, okay, it's a related entity, it's a subsidiary, but then it will require perhaps a review of the relationship to see whether the risk profile has changed since this new related entity has come into the picture. So I think this risk assessment hat always has to be on at the onboarding stage and when there is some change in the client relationship.
Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point. Because you don't know, because they might buy a company or, and then suddenly that, when you hear about that, you need to re-risk. That's a trigger event in my mind.
Yep.
You
may have a trust structure. You may have a trust structure that owns a company. And at the moment you know about that one particular company, but to segregate risk, they may have a BVI company, but to segregate risk for whatever business or what have you they're involved with, they may set up a second Panama company. And you then only knew about the initial BVI company. You only saw transactions in relation to this BVI company that has a relationship with you directly. But then you see payments going to and coming from this Panamanian company. Well, something has changed. You want to probe, you want to ask questions, you want to see why it was set up and determine whether that is changing the risk profile of the customer.
Perfect. And the other one is for those of you who have transaction monitoring, again, separate conversation, you know, a whole separate webinar, we could talk about that. But that is where you want to make sure whatever transaction monitoring platform you're using is configured by your customer to fit their profile as well. So that once you understand, you know, I actually have a very good example with my bank. I had to pay, I sent a wire transfer to a U.S. company. I have U.S. company here, U.S. company that I was sending the money to. The value was, I want to say it was either 10 or 15,000. I had never paid these people before. And my bank immediately shut down my account and stopped that transaction. And my first thought was, you know, it's going to take me all day to get my account back open. But they had fantastic fraud prevention. Account was back open in 5 minutes, got on the phone, was able to, you know, confirm my identity and go, yes, this is, you know, I made that. It wasn't a online fraud or anything like that. I know these people, and it was processed same day. So not a problem, but you got to have those policies and procedures in place and to deal with those kind of stuff. But I thought it was fantastic. They knew immediately. I had never paid those people before.
I want to make a point here because we've covered most of the elements that we had intended to cover. And we looked at product, channel, industry, economic sector, and then we looked at client. So we sort of segmented it. But for the purposes of your AML risk assessment, all of these things come together. You have to assess them individually, right down from the client and the product, determine what the weighting is in relation to each of these and what the overall or the residual risk is with respect to product, channel, industry, client. But ultimately, it feeds into your organizational AML risk assessment. And so you have to think of them collectively, one, and how they all come together, how you score. And at the back of all of this is your risk appetite statement, because your risk appetite statement is going to say how much of a particular risk, perhaps in one of these groupings, you're willing to take on. So you have an appetite. You don't have an appetite for high risk customers. I'm just saying, you don't have an appetite for high risk customers. You're going to be monitoring that. Most people don't say that. They determine what percentage of their overall portfolio they would want to see comprised of high risk clients. And then they onboard and they monitor accordingly. There may be certain industries that you say we simply do not have a risk appetite for. I know some financial institutions will say they don't have a risk appetite for the gaming sector, for example. So your risk appetite feeds into this risk assessment as well, because the risk assessment is going to reflect ultimately, or it should reflect, what your risk appetite is, what you stated your risk appetite as being. Okay, so all of these come together to give you your overall risk assessment, and be mindful of what your risk appetite is.
Right. And when you talk about the risk appetite statement, I hear the terminology business risk assessment. Is that you're referring to that? Okay, because I've not heard of risk appetite statement before. Okay, right. Now, again, we've only got about 5 minutes left, and you did what, I didn't know if you wanted to just present this horizon risk scenario.
We can, I mean, you've gone through a couple scenarios, so okay.
I like this one because it has
so let's go through it.
Cross-border nature of it,
Okay, so we have here a corporate customer. Industry is international real estate investment, and the company is registered in BVI, and the UBO is a dual citizen of Russia and St. Kitts. And I picked that one because in our region and elsewhere, we have this question around citizenship by investment. So somebody may have dual citizenship, okay? The stated source of income is said to be commercial real estate development and leasing. So they got their money in real estate development. And the assets they hold, luxury properties in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe. And there are many companies holding the various assets. And they have also set up some trusts in jurisdictions like the Bahamas and Cayman and the like. And so that's your client in a nutshell. The client frequently conducts processes cross-border wires. There are high-value transactions and their use of intermediaries for property acquisition. So they may go through a professional like an attorney or some sort of broker to acquire properties for them. And so I wanted you to share with me, and you could drop it in the chat, what you have identified in all of this with respect to the risk indicators. What are the red flags for you?
Well, the red flags, obviously, assuming I have Russia as high risk. And I'd like to hear from others too. Again, please do put it in the question box. The fact that it's in real estate, again, I'd have to look into that.
Yep.
Dubai is, again, in my initial risk assessment, I think Dubai is, I can't remember, sorry, if Dubai is or not, but Eastern Europe, commercial properties in Eastern Europe, that's Hudson. Yeah. So you got the country risk, you've got the industry risk, you've got that complex layer of ownership, including the to be honest with you, frequent cross-border wire transfers, that doesn't raise a red flag. I would expect that.
The amounts may stand out to me that they exceed 5 million for each transfer.
Per transfer, the amount, Yeah. And I'd want to know definitely more about the third-party intermediaries. So so I think everybody is ownership structure, citizen, and see, right, I didn't know about the citizenship by investment stuff because to me, I mean, if I knew that St. Kitts, I guess St. Kitts does, I think.
Yeah, that's one. A number of, I mean, Malta and other countries do, but in our region, in the Caribbean region, we have some Eastern Caribbean countries.
How do you know if somebody's citizenship, because what if they just said they're from St. Kitts? How do you know if somebody's citizenship is by a CBI program versus birth or marriage or lived there a long time? Can you tell?
So I think, and I can think back to instances where I've had to deal with this. You generally know because the citizenship is going to be different from their place of birth and perhaps their residency, because most times when they get these passports, these second passports, they don't live in the particular country that has issued the particular passport. So you would tend to know whether it's citizenship by investment. The financial institutions would know that.
Okay. Yeah, somebody says a passport
based on their due diligence, they would know place of birth, place of residency, and the due diligence process. You would know that enhanced due diligence needs to be done.
Yeah, and somebody else is asking, which country should be the country risk? And I would always go with the highest. That's how we do ours.
Absolutely.
And so there is, and just so you know, I have had somebody ask, am I in favor of, some kind of automated scoring? And that's actually how Silo works. You put in the information and it pops out a score based on the risk appetite, which we do what's called a risk appetite configuration, calibration. So we make sure we're getting each company's calibrated risk appetite. But there is the override. So I said, yes, I do like that because it makes it easier for your staff who are doing the onboarding and doing that. And let's remember too, we're moving into a more automated world now. The idea though is that because you never know, and I don't think we could ever code a system to be always 100%. You might know something about that person that's just not
Yeah.
in the system, or the documents. So I did say, yeah, I have no problem with having, automated risk scores or risk assessments generated, but they are suggested. I do
Yeah.
still make what we call in the tech industry a human in the loop. A
I
human
want to make
is
a note
always the
here.
one making that call. Yeah.
I want to make a note here quickly. We're not told that nominees are used, but we are told that third-party intermediaries are used. And I want to just bring or remind everyone of the recent changes to the FATF recommendations. Recommendation 24, I think it is, with respect to beneficial ownership and the use of nominees and the need for there to be transparency. So we aren't told here, but in this case, we're told that they're multi-layered holding companies and offshore trusts. If there are nominees involved, for whatever reason, you want to make sure that you're digging very deep to find out who your ultimate beneficial owner is, and to assess the risk associated with that ultimate beneficial owner. The FATS is of the view that we shouldn't have nominees, people pulling the strings behind the scene. Influence and control seem to be the words that they use. So if you're dealing with corporate structures, you want to make sure that, if nominees are involved, scrutinize it and really dig deep on who the ultimate beneficial owner is.
Absolutely. And I think that's interesting in our particular industry in the international financial centers, because nominees, let's remember, we are often dealing with high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals who want some privacy. And that might be the very reason why they are sitting at the companies and having the nominees put in place.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily want the world knowing that that particular house is owned by them.
Absolutely.
So I come from the world where a use of a nominee, yes, it's a red flag. Look at it. As long as we know who is ultimately behind it, then on a corporate side, on the corporate administration side, to me, that is, I can understand why. It's when the use of a nominee does not make sense.
Absolutely.
Then it's kind of like, why are you doing it that way?
Yeah.
And of course, somebody's mentioning bearer shares. Absolutely. Yeah. I almost forget that bearer shares even exist anymore.
Right. If the use of the nominee, if there's no logical reason for it and it just doesn't make good business sense, then you want to question that. And you're right. And for us in this part of the world, the use of nominees or nominee directors and shareholders provides another layer of privacy for the customer. And I think when we look at the FATF recommendations, we're really going to have to look at whether the firms that offer these nominee services, are they slavishly following the instructions of the beneficial owner, or is it just serving an administrative purpose when you provide these services? But it's interesting because this is getting the scrutiny of the FATF, and I'm sure in some of our jurisdictions, I know we've had amendments here in the Bahamas around nominees. We're going to have to watch this space.
Yeah, and some people are saying that some jurisdictions won't even allow the use of nominee arrangements, and I completely get that. Yeah, but again, it's one of those situations. You have to understand the whole picture. You have to stand back and go, all right, I've got all these red flags. Does it make sense? Because what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't mean you have to decline the business right away. Right. Just because of one aspect, one red flag. And that's what I talk about the risk calibration is. I'm kind of saying, if you've got one red flag that makes it high risk, does that make the whole client high risk for you? And that's where I have to understand people's risk appetite. So again, we've already gone through the risk scenarios with Horizon. I thought that was fantastic. I discussed that. And then we need to finish off really with how you document your risk assessment.
So documenting your risk assessment. Okay, so what do I do? How do I document this? I would say to you, and we provided a structure for you with respect to documenting your risk profile, but certainly you want to make sure that you're preparing it for external eyes. Okay, you're preparing it, one, so that your board can understand it and approve it. You're preparing it so that when the regulators come in to do an examination, they clearly see that you have assessed all of these risk levers that we discussed here today and more, and that you have assigned the appropriate risk rating to it from an organizational perspective. And so you're going to make sure that you document the various risk factors that you've considered. I want to mention here that examiners also want to see that you're not only inward looking, that you've considered your national risk assessment. And so your national risk assessment is going to have bearing on your own organizational risk assessment, because from a national level, there may be risk areas that are heightened, and you want to make sure that your internal assessment matches with what is in the NRA. Okay, so you want to document everything. That's the first thing. You want to make sure that you are speaking to your internal stakeholders who have been identified here, your board of directors. They're going to want you to walk them through it and explain how you came up with the overall risk profile. Your compliance and risk teams need to understand it, because when the regulators come in, they're the ones who are going to have to defend the risk assessment. And internal audit and internal controls as well, because ultimately they're checking to make sure that your internal controls are being implemented properly and that they're moderating the risk as it should. And I've touched on who the audience could be from an external perspective. All right.
Yeah. And I would say I came from the background where never write anything that you wouldn't want to read in court. When you are writing, oh, that was drilled into me. This is 30 years ago. And I wish more people in social media.
I come from a background where they say write it all down, because you have to be able to explain why you took a certain course of action. So the compliance people are going to say, cover your assets, document.
Exactly, cover your assets, yeah. But it's one of those situations where document the facts. I went to this link, I read this report, I saw this. And document those facts.
You are right.
Why, but don't go,
you're right.
Don't put your emotions into the document. Don't put your judgment call into the document until you have presented the facts.
Yes, it should be data-based. It should be based on data. And it should also, I'm going to say it should be based on data. And it should be actually providing a rationale for how you came to conclusions around the specific risk. So it's explanatory in nature.
Yeah. And I guess too, and also the other thing I would recommend too is remember when you are documenting or writing these, whether it's a paragraph or two or an entire file note, whatever you're writing, remember you are writing for the future. I would always write my risk assessments when I would have to do them for high-risk clients to present to senior management for the approval. And then the idea was that if this blew up in my face in 5 years from now, do I have enough information to where I could go back?
Yeah.
And do I have enough information? Because I knew, because I was living overseas at the time, and I knew my time was limited. I only had a few years, I think 5 years at the time to go. I had to write for my future, for the person who was going to sit at my desk in the future, and I might not be available.
You're right.
To ask.
You're right.
So put yourself in their shoes and make sure if you're a junior today and you're doing these today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you might be in the position where you're the manager and you're having to look back on somebody's notes. So you want to make sure that you're getting the training to document things for the future, because also, and I won't name the name, okay, but there is a certain Russian person who I think it was 2007, 2008, I had to do a lot of Google searches and it just came up all over. Bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. Okay. Fast forward I think it was like 2012, redid those searches, legitimate businessmen, 100%. You could not find a thing about him. People can clean up. That's why I say copy those links. Don't just copy the link. Do a print screen of what you see on screen.
Yeah.
Because in 5 years from now, if somebody goes, well, why did we make him high risk or whatever? You've got something on record.
Yeah.
And that is happening a lot with, I understand with China. I haven't seen it myself, but I have understood that a lot of Chinese nationals are, and I'm sure Americans are doing it too. If they've got anything negative out there, they are getting the internet cleaned up.
Yeah. So back to
the
structure. For those of you who may be working on a risk assessment right now and not knowing, you're running your Excel spreadsheets, you know what the risk level is, and you're able to picture that. But it's more, remember, I'm telling you, I told you that you're telling a story, you're explaining the risk profile of your organization. So you want to have a clear introduction where you outline the purpose of the assessment, its scope, and the methodology used. Your examiners coming in will want to know what methodology was used in determining the risk profile of the organization. You're going to need to have a section that outlines the local laws, the regulations, the guidelines. You're going to have to reference your national risk assessment. So maybe legal and regulatory framework, you want to have a section on that. Then you want to have your key findings. That's where you get to put your data in a table, the summary of the inherent risk, the summary of the internal control environment, and speak to the various risk factors, those of which that we covered today. Then you're going to outline your residual risk assessment, okay, and how that aligns with what you call it, your business risk assessment. I call it your risk appetite. Okay, so you're going to say what your residual risk is after your internal controls are in place, and how does that align with what you say is acceptable risk for your organization and what you have defined as your risk tolerance. You then want to include in that some recommendations. There may be next steps. Recommendations that are, what are the key risk mitigation strategies that you are using and will be using? If there is an opportunity to enhance your program, you want to identify that, speak to that, and say what the action steps are that you're going to be putting in place, specific, time bound, with accountabilities. Okay, so it needs to be structured. Intro, laws, key findings, residual risk assessment, your recommendations, and any enhancements that you're going to be doing to your risk management program.
Yeah. And then again, that's a whole college level course.
Yeah.
Just learning how to write a risk assessment.
It is.
Yeah.
But many regulators provide templates and tools that you can use, but you want it in a structured and uniformed format, having regard to who the audience is that will be reviewing it. Okay.
Yeah. And just to clarify,
I
just want to point out one thing, because one person, are you saying this must be done per client risk assessment?
No.
I think that's more on an enterprise, like a business organizational level. Yeah. You might take copies of your kind of individual risk assessments, which again, to me, could be a paragraph, especially if it's very, just a very simple one. Couple more paragraphs if it's more of a high risk and you have to send it up to escalate it for approval. But then say these are the situations that we came across this quarter or this year. And that kind of stuff. So I think that's
so just to clarify, the risk factors that we looked at today, like product and channel and client and sector, you will do that on individual clients, and that's theirs. That then feeds into your institutional risk profile, and your regulator is going to want to come in and they're going to want to see, well, what is your overall client risk? What is your overall product risk? And that is your AML risk assessment for the institution. All of them have to do it now. Most of the regulated entities, you're going to have to do an AML risk assessment for your institution. And all these factors that we talked about today feeds into that overall report. And so when I talked about the structure, it's about the summary or the snapshot of the risk for your organization, having regard to all of the risk factors that you have identified.
Okay. Yeah, so it is, we've gone over. I want to thank for all of you who have hung in there with us, because I know this can be very complex. Do join us for the next one. Tanya, thank you so much. I thought this was fantastic. Was there any last point that you wanted to make or emphasize?
No, I mean, I guess one point that I wanted to make is around about, so you're going to have these risk assessment procedures in place that will take into account these factors that feeds into your overall AML risk assessment for the institution. Some of you may ask, how frequently do I need to do my organizational AML risk assessment? Well, if your organization is high risk, overall high risk, you may need to do it more frequently. Every year, you may want to refresh it. If it's medium risk, every 18 months, low risk. And your regulators may also specify the cycle. But the key takeaway is that AML risk assessments are not static. They are living. It changes as clients change, as the business model change. And so this is something that you always have to keep your eye on, risk assessments. Okay, so that's it for me. It's a living document. It's not a one size fits all approach when you're doing this exercise as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure we will have many other webinars, like I said, as we kind of pull out little segments as well. So if we did cover a lot, and Tanya, I want to say thank you very much. I think we both got each other thinking during our kind of pre-call planning and all of this. And so, yeah, I think, and again, I'm still learning. As I've mentioned, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm still figuring out how to do the best, client country risk assessment. And there's new technologies out there for those of you who want to kind of explore those with me. As a matter of fact, I've even thought about kind of putting out there for people to kind of say, test this prompt on an AI to see if it works for you, kind of thing, because AI is changing the game, as we all know. And I'm sure I will do a webinar about that in the future. I don't know if you know too, we were actually mentioned in the Cayman Compass. So I think it was in yesterday's Cayman Compass that I talked about how AI is changing the AML industry. And the concern I have is that when you and I started in this role, what did I have to do? I had to do a lot, very manual data entry, granular manual work. We're going to lose that. But that kind of work is what helped me really know the details. They say the phrase, the devil's in the details.
Absolutely.
And when you are lost in those details, some people call it, oh, you get into the weeds. I'm like, you have no idea what I find in those weeds. Trust me. Yeah. If we're going to lose that in the entry level, then those people might lose the ability to make the better judgment calls.
And the key is just that. We may leverage advancements in technology, AI, and the like to support us in doing these tasks of AML risk assessment, but that's a tool. That's what it is. And it doesn't negate the need for those of us who work in this space and our teams to exercise judgment and to think. Mm-hmm. So the tool may spit out something, but you then have to assess it and analyze it to make sure that it makes sense in relation to a customer, in relation to a sector. It doesn't do away with us having to do our job. And that's the analysis piece.
And I think that is my call to the industry for everybody listening in, especially if you're in management, if you've been in this industry for a while. We need to be teaching and helping the newcomers and the younger generation understand why sometimes those details matter. Because if we adopt the AI technologies, which I'm all for, because we all need efficiency. This industry needs all the help it can get. Trust me, it's so overwhelming. So I'm very much supportive, and we're exploring it on the tech side, on our side, and doing some work on our side. However, it's like this is going to impact the next generation. I think it might even already be impacting the next generation a little bit. And so we've got to find a way to make sure we are training. And you're in a perfect situation because you're in education. You're going to be teaching at the law school. So explore and discuss these kind of things amongst yourselves. And I want to say this too. I will commend the Bahamas Compliance Association. It's very active, very professional. And one of
I'll
the
take
most,
the thank you for them. I'm proud of them.
All these years
later, 25 plus years later.
Yeah, they are one of the most active, and you really provide a lot of events, because I follow you guys on Facebook, actually, even though I'm not in the Bahamas. So if you are in the Bahamas and you are not part of the Compliance Association, I highly recommend you join.
Absolutely.
You will continue to learn a lot. And if you are part of a compliance association, follow them on Facebook. You'll see what they do. And I think you are a model.
And there's value in that. There's value in that for networking as professionals as you tackle the complex issues like we discussed today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You'll have people to share it with. All right. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Again, sorry for keeping everybody. And,
thank you.
Somebody else is saying the BVI Association is very active. So that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So and they would want me to put in a plug for the Caribbean Regional Compliance Association.
Yes,
I know that their conference is coming up in October.
Where is it this year?
St. Kitts.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So I won't be there this year, unfortunately, but I attend almost all of them. But I'm encouraging you to please support the work that's being done in the region, because when people think about the Caribbean and our risk profile, they don't look at individual countries. They put us all together. And so we need to really work together like we have been doing to make sure that the perceptions are accurate around our risk profiles.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And again, for joining us. And again, we do have some upcoming one on AML's compliance officer responsibilities, expanding scope of sanctions, and AML internal audit. So keep following us and register. And I will see you the 24th of September, everybody, hopefully. And again, I hope to see our new people again. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.